Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It is almost afternoon. We are a very diverse panel, so we thought we will take it. So we thought we will take help of some audiovisual and increase engagement. And it's not just what you're going to hear. I hope what you see helps you. We'll start the session since it's. Can we have the slides, please? So while the slide is getting set, I will give a background of how diverse the panel is. We've got people who help protect intellectual property. We have got people who advise investors and founders during valuation. We've got techno-legal background experts who have their own systems and tools in place. So everything that an innovation economy may require, we have that blend here. So, so this is the theme for this plenary discussion. We're talking about startups, IP, and innovation economy of 2030. And I think it'll help wake all of us up, the hiccup. All right. So an innovation economy is not just limited to tangible fixed assets. You throw into the mix a lot of the things that we've been discussing since morning. There are codes, algorithms, virtual assets, user interfaces, designs which are on your mobile phones. And since we're talking about innovation economy, and we're talking about startups, a little bit of focus on the Indian startup ecosystem. India is no longer just a manufacturing story or a services story. We are extremely fast growing, one of the largest growing startup and MSME economy. We've got only startups around 1 lakh registered, which just gives us an idea of how huge this discussion, how relevant this discussion is. The innovations that are happening in our jurisdiction especially are centered in AI, fintech, health tech, SaaS, and green technologies. And just a statistics that was also shared in the morning, around 60% of the patents that are being filed or the startups that are there are in AI and software space. Means it's all virtual digital assets that are being created. And 55% of the patents are only what get granted in this space, which means that there is a huge, huge section which goes unprotected, but which may have a lot of potential. So that's what we're going to navigate today. We're going to see how those without physical assets can better structure their IP portfolio and not just limit it to patents. And I am a patent attorney myself, and it is not to sell it short, the value of patents. It's just understanding that there lies something called a multi-directional, multi-layered approach. There is a IP stack that we should be looking at. So this is what we are moving towards as a discussion. We are looking at a patents plus approach and not an anti-patent, just to clarify and not to undermine the importance of patents at all. So when we have inventions, when we have businesses, there is a layer, there is a stack of technology. IP should also be treated similarly. Just like there wouldn't be one single thing on which you're basing your business, your IP can't be uni-led. And it is very important to understand that everything that you think you own, you should own. And that would include the various layers of the stack. And this is just illustrative and by no means exhaustive. The data, the brand aspect, which is absolutely not overlooked. There are lots of trademark filings and protection initiatives. But the design aspect, contractual safeguards, extremely important. It's almost become a complementary limb to IP protection. And your software's algorithms, of course, very, very important in the innovation economy, and patents, which are selective and strategically done. Now look at all that they can encompass, the kind of training data that is used, user behavior, the user interface, all of these are part of the stack. So what do you do with patents? Do you not do them? Of course you do, but it's not, the only patent approach is not sufficient. Why? Because you're building fast, you have to pivot fast. Patents can take a lot of time, they require disclosure. A lot of times you are using an open source, a third-party software. All of the other things, models are probably not proprietary. All of these have to be very carefully considered when you're making your IP stack. These are certain examples. This is just illustrative to show how you have to assess the core value of a business, the core model of the business, and then decide what your stack would be. Like something that has to do with hardware would be a perfect candidate for a patent first approach. But something which is essentially an AI SaaS based startup, you look at trade secrets, contracts, look at data governance, and optionally patents if you're not running the risk of getting a 3K objection, subject matter eligibility issue. So what do? You work on a stack which resonates with your business model, with what growth stage you are at. All of these are very, very important considerations. It can't be a linear approach. These are certain case laws where in all of these cases there were patents existing, but the cases became more in the nature of confidential information breach, misappropriation, trade secrets. Companies' files were stolen by an employee, and he went to Uber and he took all of Waymo's files. It contained the self-driving car source code. There was a patent behind it, but it wasn't a patent infringement issue. It was a trade secret and an employee mobility and a confidential information issue. This is just to show how layered these matters can be, and they are not as straightforward as we sometimes think them to be. We think of them as paper filings, just get done with it. No, there's a lot of strategy involved. This is something that is very, very critical because the entire hypothesis of a patent plus approach gets bolstered by the steps that the government of India is taking. Trade secrets, there is a serious discussion of a trade secret law. There's a bill already in place. There is an OECD research that says that countries like US, EP, and China, who have a proper trade secret protection system in place, have better R&D and innovation rates. So clearly, India is getting a sense of that, so trade secrets are very important. Designs, we recently had a design concept note by the government, wherein virtual designs, which were not getting design protected in India, shall now be allowed. If this goes through, it gives us that extra layer of protection for virtual assets. And semiconductors and ICs, we've all gone through the budget that was released last Sunday, and it spoke heavily of semiconductor and how it has to be, they used the term IP stack, and they said it has to be integrated chips, semiconductors, we have separate legislation. It can't be only manufacturing centric, protect the entire ecosystem. With this, I move to the next aspect. Now that we've understood that there is an IP stack requirement and protection, we have with us Isha from Trayambak, who routinely deals with creators, innovators, and founders as well as investors, and helps them from creation to valuation. And what is her take when it comes to valuing assets in this fast-paced, virtual asset-heavy innovation economy? Over to you, Isha.
Thank you, Sneha, for the introduction, and thank you, organizers, for inviting me as a speaker. So I'll be just touching around a topic which is not usually shared, or I would say seen in the IP fraternity. So we have a world of IP where we are talking about the entire registrations, litigation, prosecution, and so on. And then there is a business side of IP. So when I talk about IP valuation, as the word suggests, that putting a value to your asset, like you put a value to your property, maybe you know your property is worth, say, 1 million, 2 million, or whatever. In a similar manner, you can put value to your IP. And when I say IP, most of the times, in the common cases, it is going to be patents, trademarks, copyrights, and designs. So once we understand that what an IP valuation means, we would like to also understand when is it needed, like why is it required for you to value an IP. So most of the time where I have seen an IP valuation coming as a requirement from the client side is that either they are going for a merger and acquisition, so two companies are thinking about getting the IP acquired. Second would be if you are a startup or a business owner who is willing to raise funds. At that point of time, investor would look ahead with the value of your IP. And it is said that approximately 75% of the tech-based businesses IP valuation contributes to that much. So roughly probably your tangible assets would be 20 to 25%. So intangible assets contribute to this much when it comes to a technology-based business. Another scenario would be when we are going ahead with a litigation. At that point of time, court can ask you to calculate the damages, and how are you going to decide that what is the damage that you have incurred. So unless you know the value of your IP, it's next to impossible. So in these common cases, we do the IP valuation. And how do we do it? So IP valuation is a very interesting, I would say, combination of a IP professional as well as a registered valuer. So these registered valuers are usually merchant bankers who understand the IP valuation process in general. So how it is done is, it is divided into almost two parts, where the registered valuers will do by various methods, like cost-based method, then there is a income-based method, then you have a market-based method. Just to give you an example so that you have a clear understanding regarding the same. If you have created a smartwatch for the first time, right? So there has been no smartwatch existing. You have done your IP, the entire exercise of registering it is already being done. Now you need to value your IP. So if in case we don't have anything in market, so this is first time, we might go ahead with a cost-based approach, which means that the cost to make that product, or make that innovation rather, is directly proportional to the value of IP, which is not the realistic case. It's usually not the one. But it is a method to do so. So in a technology where you don't have any market to compare or any future which can be projected, you can use your cost-based approaches. Then we have a market-based approach where, say, for example, Apple already had a smartwatch. Now Samsung decided to launch a smartwatch. So they would have a comparative product where they would probably know that if the Apple watch is worth this much, maybe Samsung watch will also be this much. But in this case, the problem is that all this information is highly confidential and critical, so you might not be able to fetch that data of another company which you are comparing with. Third approach is your income-based approach, which means that you will decide a future value and then boil it down to the current value. So which is usually done by DCF methods, little technical term that way. So this is done in most of the cases where software innovations are being concerned, and right now, as the the panelists were only talking about AI and future, so I believe that this method is going to be relevant. In addition to it, where the IP professional comes into picture is rating those IP. So if I give you an example, there is a patent application. This patent may be two patent applications. One is only filed in India, another one is filed in, say, multiple countries, say 5 to 10 countries. And then we have a patent application which is not broadly written and a patent application which is narrow. So of course we understand that once we cross the jurisdictions, we cross the enforceability, the value or the rating of the patent application would increase. So that is where the IP professional contributes to those aspects. So these are the methodologies that we usually do. And once we decide that this is going to be the value of this particular IP, later on we move to the commercialization, of course. So we are not going to just value the IP, you would need money out of whatever you are creating, be it your business. So what are the different categories that you can utilize for commercialization? So first would be a self-use. So if I'm a startup owner, I created an IP, I want to use it, I don't want anybody else to infringe my product or my innovation. So in that regard, I'm going ahead with an IP commercialization. Another one would be, I have created, but I don't know what to do with it. And in most of the cases, academics don't know what to do with it. So industry is using IP for its own purpose, but most of the time academic institutes are not aware about how to utilize it. So they are going ahead with not only academics, but in general your industries are also doing it. So you can go ahead with licensing models, you can go ahead with transfer model, just to make it a little bit more clear. Like if you stay in an apartment which is rented, it is like a licensing model where the landowner is still the owner and it is just getting a royalty out of it. If you want to sell off your property, probably you will do the assignment and then there will be a lump sum amount which is going to be paid for you. So similar fashion IP also works. Along with that, there are a lot of procedures where cross-licensing is happening, where two companies are kind of giving their IP to each other. So best example would be Tata. They actually came up with a lot of EV technologies and now you see it on your roads. So it became really successful. So a lot of cross-licensing happens between companies. And the last one that I would like to say, which is very unique, not too many people are aware about it and talking about it, is IP financing. So most of the countries, if I can put the hierarchy, China is leading this by example. So IP financing would mean that you can put your IP as a collateral in the bank and actually get loan against it. So India is still yet to progress in that direction, but this is what we are looking ahead with, that your IP is going to be so much valuable that loans can be easily accessed based on that. So that is something that I would like to cover about IP valuation. Just to end it, Sneha, I would say that please don't sit on your IP. Try to convert it into some currency, gold or silver, or probably not gold and silver, just currency, it's dropping. So yeah, just make something out of it. Yeah, thank you from my side.
Thank you, Isha. The next question would be to Manjusha. She has been at the has a rare combination of building legal tech solutions and deeply understanding the friction points of law and technology. And she's made solutions which are for the lawyers, by the lawyers, as they like to call it. So how is legal tech helping founders, startups, for that matter, even general businesses, young businesses, with IP filings, and what are the concerns that you would want to address through this platform that the founders can be mindful of when they are using legal tech for their filings?
Good morning, everyone. Let me begin with a simple question. How many brilliant ideas have we seen fail, not because they lacked innovation, but because they lacked protection or legal clarity? If we look around, I am sure each of us knows at least one startup, one idea, one entrepreneur or that struggle not due to lack of talent, but because the legal foundation was missing. Ideas move fast today, technology moves even faster, but unprotected innovation disappears the fastest. And that is exactly where law, technology, and innovation must come together. It is truly an honor to be here among legal stalwarts, policy makers, legal technologists, and innovators who are shaping the future of innovation and legal ecosystems. And I'm happy to share a few thoughts from both a lawyer's and a legal tech founder's perspective. And JuryScan actually began from a simple frustration many of us lawyers share in our daily practice. Because as lawyers, we don't really struggle with law, we struggle with managing information. How many of us here have spent more time searching for judgments than actually preparing arguments? Exactly, we have all been here. Sometimes we spend hours navigating scattered databases, files, and precedents, and by the time we find what we need, half the energy is already gone. Whereas our real work should be strategy, analysis, and advocacy. And that is why JuryScan aims to simplify complex judgment, provide structured legal intelligence, and redefine how lawyers research, manage, and prepare cases efficiently. Because legal intelligence should empower innovation and not slow it down. Today, I'll be speaking on a topic that sits at the heart of sustainable growth: technology, law, and innovation, the triad empowering the startup system of tomorrow. Over the last decade, technology has transformed almost every industry: finance, healthcare, governance, education, and now even legal practice itself. And if we are honest, legal practice is changing faster than many of us expected. As we move toward the innovation economy of 2030, one reality is becoming clear. The future will belong to those who can integrate technology, law, and innovation and make them work together. Look at this triad. Technology gives us speed, scalability, and efficiency. Innovation gives us creativity and solutions. But law, particularly intellectual property law, gives innovation identity, protection, and long-term value. Without law, innovation remains vulnerable. Without protection, idea remains exposed. And without structure, growth becomes fragile. And when these forces work together, they don't just build startups, they build resilient ecosystems. In my interactions with startups and founders, I often notice a familiar pattern. They build fast, they launch fast, they scale fast, but they forget to protect what they build. Not intentionally, but because survival feels more urgent than protection in early stages. We have seen startups grow rapidly only to later face brand disputes or ownership conflicts simply because legal protection wasn't considered early. And let's be honest, protecting innovation always feels expensive until a dispute arises, and then it suddenly becomes very expensive. And that is why intellectual property today is not just legal compliance, it is a business asset. Innovation without legal protection is like light without direction. Today, patents, copyrights, trademarks are not just legal compliance, they are business assets and valuation drivers. In fact, the most valuable companies in the world today are not asset heavy, they are IP rich. This transformation is equally relevant for legal professionals. Legal practice itself is evolving and expectations from lawyers are also changing. But lawyers today still spend enormous time tracking cases, repeating research, and managing scattered information. This is where legal tech platforms like JuryScan are working toward bringing a quiet but powerful shift. We are reimagining the lawyer's workspace through a personalized dashboard where advocates can research efficiently, manage cases, organize precedents, and prepare arguments strategically. So instead of spending time, energy searching for information, lawyers can focus on winning arguments. The idea is simple: help lawyers argue smarter, not work longer. Technology, when aligned with law, does not replace lawyers, it elevates them. And as AI begins transforming research and drafting processes, the real value of lawyers will increasingly lie in strategy, interpretation, and advocacy. Technology will handle repetition, lawyers will handle judgment. This evolution also brings us to incubators and accelerators. They are no longer just spaces for refining business models. They must now become legal and IP empowerment hubs where founders learn from day one how to identify intellectual assets, protect innovation early, and use law as a strategic advantage. Because the right time to think about IP is not after scaling, but its inception. As we look ahead, the ecosystem of tomorrow will not be built by technology alone. It will be built by innovators who dare to dream, technologists who scale ideas, lawyers who protect and guide the innovation, and policymakers who create enabling frameworks. Imagine an India where every startup graduates not just with a product but with strong IP foundations. Every innovator understands that legal structure strengthens innovation, and every lawyer leverages technology to practice smarter and better. Because ultimately, technology gives us speed, innovation gives us direction, law gives us structure and sustainability, and intellectual property binds them together. My message to innovators and lawyers is simple: build fast but build protected. I sincerely thank the organizers for this wonderful opportunity to share my thoughts on such a prestigious platform. It is encouraging to see spaces where law, technology, and innovation comes together in a meaningful dialogue. Because the future belongs to those who protect their ideas, and that future is built on intellectual property law. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjusha. The question that's very, very interesting, and it brings us to the end of the panel discussion, is for Priyesh. Now that you deal in mergers and acquisitions and VC transactions, how are you using AI tool, and how is technology and capital intersecting and helping startups get most value out of their inventions?
Yeah. Before I start, a couple of confessions. First of all, I just find myself a slightly odd one out here, whether it's on this panel or everywhere, because I'm not very tech savvy, or I'm not a tech lawyer. So I use tech definitely, whether while advising my clients or using it as a tool, but I'm not a tech or IP lawyer. I'm a pure deal counsel, M&A lawyer. 10 years I've spent with law firms advising different kind of M&A, PEVC deals, whether it's a big large scale M&As or startup fundings and all. And last 5 years I've been with Blackstone Group, just doing all investments and M&A advisory. So yeah, the first confession is I have nothing to do with IP or tech law. Whatever I'm saying is purely through a lens of a deal counsel, deal advisor, whose work doesn't end with the closing, but even after the closing, dinners and all, the stress and all continues, because you have actually advised on that deal, that diligence, and those valuations are backed by your reports. And the second confession is, it might be possible that use whether in a deal or day-to-day advisory or whatever, but yeah, there's a way and there's a level up to which I'm dependent upon that, and I can't be fully becoming I'm just, to cut it down, I'm just using it as a tool and not like a master where I'm a slave and it becomes a master kind of thing. So yeah, there's a boundary which works for me very well, and that's the stage where I truly believe that legal tech and AI is today where we are. We need to use it efficiently, we can't ignore it. If we ignore it, we'll be delaying, we'll be slowing down our work, all those things, I completely agree. But yeah, we need to draw a boundary where it comes. So the point is, I'm not questioning legal tech, I'm not questioning AI, I'm no one to question. Everybody is using it, I'm using it. But yeah, I'm questioning what it comes with and what it relies on and how much we can go with it, kind of scenarios. And this arises more because I'm just looking at it from Indian scenario. A lot of things work better in different legal jurisdictions and all. But in India, when we talk about deals, whether it's a large-scale M&A deal, promoter-driven old countries like established companies, or it's a new, fresh startup with a fresh idea, innovation, led by new founders and all. In both these scenarios, Indian legal system, whether it's judiciary or it's like our day-to-day contractual works and all, the way it works, it's still slightly different. Relying a lot on legal tech and AI on diligences, which ultimately impacts the valuation, is something where we need to be careful. Definitely, as I said, we need to use AI. We cannot be lagging behind. But just to give you a real life example, a couple of years back, I was involved in a deal where we were advising, and we started using all sort of legal softwares, legal tech, AIs for diligences. The result was, diligence was very, very fast. Everybody wanted that. Nobody wants a 2,000-pager report now. Everything has shrunk down to a red flag report, which is like a 20-pager, 30-pager. AI is making a life very easy. You are analyzing, reviewing thousands of contracts. In 10 minutes, in 20 minutes, your report will be out. In 30 minutes, you'll give a green signal that contracts are okay. It falls under this band of risk. Report was fast. Report was greener than usual. Everything was fine. Valuation was decided basis that. Obviously, legal diligence is a part of valuation. There are a lot of other aspects, but yeah, the legal part of it, legal diligence and all, whatever was there, valuation was decided. The problem is what happened after 18 to 19 months when the business failed, things started getting bad. Nobody questioned that why the business failed. The main question was to the counsels who advised on the deal, whether the diligence was done in the right direction. Everybody knew diligence happened. Diligence was a tick mark. But whether diligence happened in the right direction was a big question mark. And again, if I go one step deeper into it, just to highlight a couple of quick, like obviously a lot of things were involved in diligence which impacted valuation, but a couple of quick points. Contracts. In Indian scenario, contracts are, we have Indian Contract Act, which still, which allows implied or unwritten contracts also a valid form of contract. Now, whether it's a old established real estate developer-based company which is running through promoters' name, their image, their relationships, or it's a new startup where founder plays a very, very important role. A lot of things depends upon the founder being there and founder's relationship with the other vendors or clients. In both these kinds of contracts, when AI is analyzing that contract, if there are 50 contracts, it will analyze basis some parameters and all. But what lies beneath it, the contract in the first scenario is solely dependent upon that promoter being there, that developer being there, his relationships with the other parties. So even if a contract contains like very, very stringent clauses, which AI could point it out as a risk, or if it contains very, very liberal clauses, which AI again points out as a risk, the reality could be different in an Indian scenario. Similarly, when we talk about startup contracts and all, a lot of things are promoter driven. If tomorrow promoter leaves or promoter's relationship changes and all, a lot of things will get changed. The scenario will change. Now, these kind of scenarios which are very prevalent in Indian market, Indian scenario, it can't be like something which legal tech or AI will able to advise to the client. Contract can say, Indian lawyers are very creative. You will have a 100-page contract where things will be written in a language, in a manner, in a contradictory clauses, where as a lawyer I can take 5 different interpretation. Forget about what interpretation AI is taking. So, plus another reality is that a lot of things are not even written in Indian scenarios. You'll have side letters, you have these letters, you have this miscellaneous contract, joining this contract with the contract which is not even told by the other party as a link contract to this thing. Supplemental agreement, supplemental to supplemental agreement, there's no end to it. So AI catching all these things rightly is not where we are right now in India. Secondly, talking about litigation and regulators, right now, what I look after a portfolio which comprises of around 30 office portfolios, like office assets, hotels, and everything. real estate is a very, very big part of it. Litigations are like, it's attached to real estate. You can't ignore that fact. Now, if I look after the AI reports which I get, out of 30 litigations, 20 litigations are always categorized under mid-risk or high-risk because it's a real estate matter. But I know as a matter of fact, those litigations have not moved from 30 years. But again, I cannot say that all these are low risk. There's 1 or 2 matters where I know this particular person who is coming through different family members under 5 different names and different litigation against the same land is a problematic man. And we will get an order against in this matter at any moment of time. These are the things which lawyers can understand, they can analyze. I don't think AI and tech is in a position. Again, I don't undermine the importance of AI and legal tech. While analyzing, summarizing those 30, 50 cases, pages and all, I need the help of AI. I need AI for it. But I cannot undermine the importance of human mind who is sitting and who is applying its judgment to those AI reports and all. This is litigation. Regulatory is even more complicated in Indian scenario, trust me. And again, whether it's a old real estate-based company or a new startup. A lot of things which AI will say that it does not fall under the regulator red mark because there's no regulatory action in the past, or there's no notices, there's no show cause notices, there's no history of any regulatory action and all. It's mainly because a lot of regulators in India, they have a particular level of tolerance. I'm not talking about RBI and FEMA, those are different, but whether you talk about Pollution Control Board or you talk about BBMP for that matter and all, law will say one thing, practice will be one thing, regulators' behavior will be like another reality only. Today they are very, very tolerant. They are tolerating a lot of things for one or the other reasons which is not a subject matter of this forum. Like why they are tolerating. Tomorrow the new officer will come or something will happen or some other issue will erupt and the questions will be raised and you will get a big notice after the diligence, after the deal has happened. So till date, there was no regulatory action. Regulatory scenario was completely clear, green as per the reports and all. And soon after the deal, after 2 months, you are getting a big notice which questions your a lot of like inherent licenses, approvals, and continuity of business, which is a big, big, big red mark when we talk about valuation. Now, these are just few examples which I'm randomly saying. Indian market, whether it's established market or startup, it's full of such scenarios. So yeah, unfortunately, I think we are on the correct path, but we need to put a boundary or level how much to use. I completely agree when I heard in the previous panel that legal tech or AI is in a stage where they are like a first-year associate. Considering it's Indian market, I'll still put it as a good intern. Not even like a first-year associate. It will still require some training to reach the associate level. But yeah, it has made my life very easy. A lot of things which I was giving to 2 juniors, 3 juniors and all, I'm still giving to them because I need human mind still now. But yeah, I'm checking it through AI. It's always better to have different things and all. Now just quickly coming to another point which I'm taking a clue from what Isha was mentioning about valuations of startups and all. All these startups which are mainly based on tech, AIs and all, it's a model, a lot of business models and all, it's driven by that. I completely agree, IP plays a big role where IP valuation and your tech valuation constitutes 60, 75, 80% of your total valuation and all, which is a big thing. My only fear again lies is a lot of these apps, startups and all, it's very innovative, it's very useful, but if we closely analyze, in Indian scenario, it's falling under those zones, not all, but a lot of these, they are falling under the gray zone of legal permissibility. Law in India is again like it's not developing on daily basis. Even if somebody is trying to develop it, it will take 2 to 3 years to come up with some draft regulations to make something legal or illegal. So just to give another example, if we talk about delivery of medicines in India, like there are a lot of rules around it. What drugs, medicines can be sold over a counter, what can be delivered over to your house, what requires prescription, what is a Schedule Y drug, a lot of things. But if we go into the law and all the laws, regulations, they are written for those old scenarios where you have pharmacists, pharmacist guys sitting there signing and doing all those things. But nowadays all these medicines are available like with a touch, with a click of your app. I don't know how it's happening. I had personally analyzed a lot of these things. It falls completely in the gray zone. So today the valuation is a big question mark for me because these models are not even like completely 100% authorized. Tomorrow like gaming or gambling, online gambling and all things will come where it can be allowed, it cannot be allowed, it can come with restrictions and all which will impact your valuation. So yeah, there's a lot of like complex things, especially considering we are in India. The laws are slow, judiciary, there's a lot of backlogs and all. By the time laws are formulated or situations become clear, or I really have my doubts with the regulatory and judicial behavior that's continue to be like this only here. So yeah, we are slightly far away, but let's hope and let's continue using it. That's what I'm doing. And
Thank
sorry
you,
if my views are
Priyesh.
slightly diverging to others.
No, it was, I think, very enlightening. I'm sure everybody would agree. And his concerns about AI reminded me of any Potterheads here. How Mr. Weasley would say is true for AI, that anything that does not have a mind of its own and you cannot see where he keeps his mind and thinks for himself, you have to be cautioned of. So for anybody who's a Potterhead would get my reference. And with that, I open the floor to questions, if any. We've covered quite a bit, so.
Hello. Sorry. Hello. My name is Siddharth Mitra. I am a tech lawyer at Techolution India Private Limited. My question is addressed to you, sir. So, as you were speaking, right, there is a cautiousness that you need to cover with regard to AI usage in law. But AI inherently works on the principle of continuous learning and continuous integration. If there is a cautious deployment that take place, the AI will not have the opportunity or the cases to learn and develop itself to the point that we can actually use it in more and more situations. So what is your advice in that case?
I completely agree. So that's why I said it's still in the learning stage. Now the only question is whether you really, as a lawyer who is advising company or your clients, do you really want to be a subject of that learning, where you are like a gunning bag where AI is using you to get your, like, to learn and to advise somebody better in the next 5 years? So that's a question mark. Obviously, as I said, I'm not against AI. You need to use AI, but you cannot undermine or reduce the application of human mind right now. So probably we'll reach, same, I completely agree with you, and probably after 5 years, 10 years, or maybe 2 years, or it's very fast, maybe after 6 months, we'll reach a stage where AI is in a position where no error is occurring, everybody is comfortable, or probably we get a judgment also that where court says that we can rely on AI. Then it's even far more comforting. But the problem is we are not there right now. So we need to use it. We need to give this data to AI to learn also. That's completely fine. I'm not against it. But yeah, we need to continue applying human mind, human judgment to it. That judgment cannot be ignored. So just a quick another thing. Like what I feel is AI is just, along with cost and time, it's also reducing the level of skepticism. Like earlier, I remember when I was I started my career and all, when I used to go for diligences to factories where physical, that time on-site diligence used to happen, we used to ask so many questions, like a simple HR diligence and all, we used to ask like, why this person left, what was the history, what all those stuffs and all, and we used to go into deep to get some reality, what happened, and why this litigation matter didn't reach the court and all. Today, with everything happening, like first it's changed from off-site to on-site diligence, then to AI, tech-based diligence and all these questions, level of like depthness to that investigation, diligence, everything has just gone. So the point is, we need to use AI, continue doing it, but still apply that mind. The prompts which you are giving to that AI and all for checking and all, that can't be reduced. So we are still in the middle level and all, but I completely agree. Unfortunately, we are the subject of AI learning, so we need to be overconscious. We can't help.
My name is Avilash and I'm an IP professional at Archer and Angel. I have a question. So considering the open source and the collaborative ecosystem that we have, and also India is leading in open source contribution in GitHub, how does an early stage startup differentiate between nice to have IP or a must have IP? Now, I would like to limit this question to startups which are in edtech and biotech and in pharma, because there we have to balance the protection of IP and as well as the public policy of access to the most advanced form of education to all children, and also someone who is in need of a medical care.
Thank you, Avinash, for your question. So what you've essentially asked was covered in one of the examples. What you have to understand is, one, I feel that we cannot quite subject edtech and pharma technology in the same bracket. So I'll not be able to give you one answer for those two very different startup domains. Let's take, say, edtech, for example. And we've identified our business. Now, what is it? What are the layers of that? You've used open source. So certainly you're looking at what have you taken it? What are their terms? What are you bound by? Now, when you create from there, what have you created? The key point is know what you've created and then own what you've created. And then you build your ecosystem around that. So once you've identified anything that you've taken from a third party or something that is openly available comes with its own limitations, you understand those limitations and then you get to step two, you create and then you protect with a repertoire of IP protection tools and mechanisms available. So that's the broader answer. I think a more specific one would be dependent on the growth stage and also on nitty-gritties of what else is underlying. But as I see it in EdTech, if it's not really system, patents anyways goes out of the window. So,
Thank you.
thank you all for being a fantastic audience. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sneha Sharma, for moderating this session so beautifully. I would like to thank all the panelists, Ms. Isha Sharma, Manjusha Murthy, and of course, Priyesh Sharma. Thank you so much. I would like to, request you to stay here for a while. May I call on stage Pooja and Shrasti Deepa to present those mementos. Thank you. So much again. This session has brought up all major insights around startup ecosystem as well as IP framework that will chart a major economic shift going forward, which we have already started seeing this today. I think that will perhaps reshape the economy and change the paradigm. Thank you once again for being with us. Thank you. Thank you so much.